There's a number of legislators on. They each have a section. Representative Moore also joined us, and so he'd been busy. We hadn't quite got a slide from him, but we'll get his input as well. So I believe what we'll probably do is they can introduce themselves per section. We just kind of put together a brief presentation on different sections. We've been our block has been actively engaged in this, both at the state and the local level from day one. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't talk with the budget director or Bullock himself or the chief of staff. I tend to talk with those folks fairly regularly, and I tend to spend time talking with Senator Daines or his staff on a regular basis as well. And so we've been trying to coordinate between the two. We've been trying to track and understand various sections. We each kind of focus on a different section. So I guess with that, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I can get that to work. Share. All right, I got to get to find the screen. Screen 3. Share. I'm assuming that folks can see here a screen appeared.
Yes.
All right. So we'll work through a discussion here, and then we'll open it up to questions on every area. But figured we'd start off by just kind of working through a discussion of some of the things we're working on. And so I guess we'll get started here. And if I get my slideshow to change, we'll begin with Nancy Ballance, Chair of Appropriation, and also Representative Moore, and we'll talk some about this, our fund balance and where the state is and what we see. So Nancy.
Thank you. Nancy Ballance, representative from House District 87 in Ravalli County. I guess I'm supposed to say turned out House member. What I wanted to show you with this chart it is because of some decisions that were made in the last couple of sessions, we find ourselves in actually a very good financial position going into this crisis, which, you can imagine had this been end of 2017 or beginning of 2018, things would have looked much different than they do right now. So I think we are feeling good about that. What we're seeing here in the chart on the right, and the bottom in blue, you'll see our ending fund balance, which is about almost $100 million higher than what we had anticipated when we left town. We see a budget stabilization reserve fund in the orange that is fully funded. Our fire fund is in good shape. You see that in the gray. The yellow slice is the governor's emergency fund, which is $16 million that's statutorily appropriated. That's available to the governor based on any emergency, but this one in particular, it will be helpful. And then what you see above in green is the disaster relief to Montana. So what you'll notice there is that is a huge addition to what we already have set up in our own reserves. So I'll leave that for just a second. Let me talk about revenues. What we saw in the last revenue update, which was beginning of March, revenues were trending higher than HJ2. We know that they are going to be less in the next month. And then because of the income tax being moved out to July 15th, we're going to see some issues there with money coming in. So we know it's going to be lower. But again, we went into this with revenues that were higher than we expected. So we are feeling good about it. And then the unemployment insurance fund, we took a look at that about a month ago as this thing started to understand where we were. And we are actually in one of the best positions we've been in the last decade. Since 2011, the lowest that we have seen that fund go is 107 million. So 360 million is a great place to start, and then you will have seen the federal government adding some to that. What we are expecting a little bit of is some liquidity and cash flow issues again, because of the income tax payments being delayed. And then the federal disaster relief, which is expected to come into our general fund at April 24th, will be there to pay for any unbudgeted expenditures that result from this COVID-19 crisis. So the cash flow won't quite work out. The spending will have already occurred. That's hit us, some of it. But with the money coming in, we can reimburse those pretty quickly. We'll go into the general fund, which will provide a few challenges for us in tracking all of it, but we'll work through those. And then there's additional relief also in HR 748, which is the CARES Act, for schools, for Medicaid, for several areas. There's a big spreadsheet that talks about where those funds will go. So that's in addition to this $660 million that you see in the green on the chart. Things are changing quickly. What actually came to the state was $1.2 billion in disaster relief. We were 55% of that. The $660 million goes to the state, and then 45%, the $540 million, will go to local governments. As late as Tuesday, we were thinking that all that money would come to the state, and then we would be in charge of distributing it out to the counties and tracking it to make sure that it was only spent on unbudgeted expenditures relating to COVID-19. I was on a call yesterday. The White House does briefings for elected officials. They said, no, that's not the case. Local governments will have to apply, and it will come to them directly, and they will be responsible for managing that, which is kind of good news for us at the state level, and I think more efficient for local governments as well. For the state funds, the governor has the ability to accept those funds without legislative involvement, and then the monies are statutorily appropriated to the governor and will be put into the general fund. So right now, what we're looking at, we're not seeing any reason that's going to require a special session. Nothing that the legislature directly has to be involved in terms of the spending of these monies. So I think that wraps it up. We can handle questions at the end if there are any related to this one. And Llew, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Nancy. And so I guess summary is the state entered this in pretty good shape. Guidance coming down is a little difficult, right? We are assuming this 660 million is supposed to be in by April 24th. That's the discussion point. I've heard both ways on whether the state distributes as Nancy has said, distributes the 540. The last being it goes to local government, but now we're getting some directions that only local governments that are above a certain population can apply directly, and we don't qualify. It's going to have to be distributed by the state. Our challenge is until guidance fully comes out, we're subject to what is often appears to be a mind change that's going on at the federal level. We'll see where that goes. But if this, for a time frame for this nastiest to happen, it was a good starting point. So let me see if I can get the slide to change. We've been actively involved in both trying to get, and you guys, since you're the chamber, are probably familiar with this section, you know, both the SBA loans, the EIDL loans, right? The ones that exist that you can possibly get $10,000 up front, and the payroll protection loans. What we seem to be running into at the moment, you know, because the goal, of course, that everyone wanted was a bridge gap for business, that this was quick. To be brutally honest, SBA is like the opposite of quick. Those of us that have been in doing business for a long time and have brought SBA stuff to a bank, notice that bankers hide under tables and start crying when you say the word SBA. And that's because they've been historically slow and hard to deal with. So what's going on now, I talked to actually Thielman and Daines about this again, is that there appears to be a bit of a power struggle going on between Treasury and the SBA. And effectively, the SBA wanted to have its full 15 days to propagate rules and to be the SBA, be slow. Treasury had said, that's not the goal, be fast, and you need to do it now. And so you're getting mixed messages from both, what's in, what's out. They're trying to get better guidance out, but this is making, in particular, our Montana banks hesitant. We've read letters from Stockman, from Glacier, etc. I just talked to Thielman about this in the morning because some of the other states the banks are being more aggressive. So I see there's a bunch of folks being directed to SBA brokers in other states simply because of the fact that they're afraid that if this turns out to be a quote unquote, stealing someone's word, dash for the cash, and Montana banks are hesitant to allow you into the dance, that we may not be able to participate in the dash for the cash. And again, we're also hearing it might get refilled. But most of you can find these online now, these PPPs, the EDILs. There seems to be no negative in applying for both the EDIL and the PPP. You can't use them from the same source, but if the 10,000 grant that comes out is usable, and you would have to make sure that if you accepted both loans, they weren't on the same item. But the biggest issue primarily is guidance, and this lack of guidance has the least the majority of Montana banks I talk to that are quite hesitant. And I'm hoping, given that tomorrow's the starting day, that some of this clears up, or our Montana businesses could find that. I would hate to see a world where we had all the other states participate and Montana not get at least its fair share. Unemployment insurance, obviously, if you're a straight employee, that's pretty straightforward. It swamped the system at the state. They've amped its bandwidth up. They're working again. And so on the traditional employee, basically, if you can get through their system, you can get signed up. It's a little clunky that it doesn't always see your job attached. So that's a challenge. There is a self-employment section that will be coming to the Montana Works interface, to the UI system. Of course, that's got to be two things have to occur. They have to have the guidance. What do the self-employed shops have to provide to access it so that they can program the interface? So right now, they're just saying, well, apply and get turned down. And then that'll show that you tried, and you'll be part of the self-employment, the ability, and I see this as a barber or a very small shop. The challenge you have here is that that's easy to say, but to the barber or the person applying for this, it's still slow. So again, struggling with guidance. What we've been doing is, talking to the interim head here, trying to get this information out as quickly as possible, trying to get at least reasonably accurate information out. But of course, these folks are watching TV and says, this is available, go get it. And the state says, we can't set up how to give it until we get guidance. And they say guidance is forthcoming. And even when they get guidance, you don't reprogram a computer system overnight. But I'm still telling folks that the small self-employed, not only can employees qualify it, so can self-employed, contractors, etc., in some manner. I'll let Eric speak to the farm and rancher side, but again, this is an on and off. But Eric?
Thanks, Llew. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I've been on the phone with a lot of bankers in our area as well. A lot of uncertainty with whether or not the PPP program applies to ag and ag businesses. Treasury seems to think it does. SBA thinks it does not. Again, same thing as Llew said, we're waiting on a lot of guidance. We know as you can see on the slide, the $14 billion, the $9.5 billion that went to Secretary Perdue, that went to cattle and livestock producers for the 9.5, and the Commodity Credit Corporation for the 14. The part of the 14 that makes me nervous is, if you remember the MFP program that came out last year in response to China's tariffs against U.S. soybean producers, Montana did not do well in that at all. The Midwestern states were compensated $150 to $175 per acre. Montana, as in much of the Western states, only got $15 per acre. So I think in the interest of our Montana producers, we need to watch that very carefully and get some input into USDA, because I've heard talk that the 14 billion will be something like the MFP program, and we did not do well in that. That's about all I have. The coronavirus hasn't hit ag in the short term as much as it has smaller retailers, because most Montana producers haven't really sold anything yet at lower prices. Concern with the beef industry, of course, is lack of demand due to a close down of the hotel and restaurant trade. And then the sort of nightmare scenario is that we'll lose packing plant capacity if the packing plants aren't able to get enough workers because of the COVID. The big packing plant in Greeley, JBS, had 800 employees call in sick this morning. That was part of what has a futures lock limit down.
Yeah, and in Montana, the group that probably is yelling the loudest in ag, because a lot of ag can survive a little bit of time because of storage, it gets it later, are the spud guys. The spud guys, if you think about potatoes, they don't store, and we have a lot of seed potato in production, especially in that Bozeman area. The spud guys basically sell to places that make frozen items for French fries and restaurants. You shut your restaurants down, and your demand for the spuds is falls through the floor. And the challenge with a spud is if you don't get her delivered on time, it's no longer a spud by the end of the summer. It's kind of a sprouted, ugly mess. And so the spud guys are struggling on the ag side at an all new level. Went too fast here. Often not talked about, and again, I'm talking to the chamber here, but just information. There are some key tax provisions in this bill that actually make some sense, particularly for restaurants. To be able to take and carry. Again, this is a slower thing. I'm assuming most folks have good accountants, but if you have any losses, being able to distribute them backwards through time, so that you can take out some of the potential profits you had there and get refunds, has changed. Interest deduction rules have changed, and then that retail glitch where we went to try and it was in the tax bill, right? Trump's tax bill caused that glitch that effectively they were trying to get it so that restaurants, folks in the commercial field could 100% expense stuff in the year, and it actually got caught the other way, and it went to a 39-year life. They did fix that, and they made it retroactive. So, probably one of the harder hit industries, if they did some updating, could potentially go back a couple of years, get some expensing, and get some refunds on their taxes. Again, your good accountants, I'm sure, are looking at this, but just wanted the chamber folks to think about it a little bit. I know my guys are all looking at it. Fitzy, are you on? We wanted to talk about employee rights in this.
Sure. So this is probably something that's going to come up with your smaller businesses here in the state of Montana. This was one of the acts that was passed by Congress. It's effective yesterday, April 1st. But what this does is it expands paid leave and some medical leave to employees of businesses under 500 employees. If you're under 50, you can ask for a waiver from it, but it's generally going to apply probably to most employees in the state of Montana. If you look here, what it does is it allows up to 2 weeks of paid sick leave at the regular rate for qualified employees, and that there's some subjects. I think the way to read this is if you look down below, they have the qualifying reasons. So 1 through 3, you're subject to a local quarantine order, which is going to be everybody in the state of Montana now. Advised by 2 is you've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. Or 3, if you're experiencing COVID symptoms and seeking medical diagnosis, you're going to be eligible for 2 weeks of paid leave. So that's up in the top under the paid leave entitlements, 100% for qualifying reasons, up to $511 daily or $5,110. Now, for reasons 4 through 6, you're going to get you can get 2/3 of your qualifying pay if you're caring for somebody who's in self-quarantine or experiencing some other health condition. And then the last one is if you've got kids out of school, this is the last one, you can get up to 12 weeks of paid leave. I was reading some of the guidance. The first 2 weeks can be non-paid, but the remaining 10 have to be paid at the rate there that they specify. This isn't going to apply to employees who've been laid off or furloughed, and it doesn't apply to people that weren't employed at the time. There's some nuances to it. There's quite a bit. The U.S. Chamber does have some guidance, along with, I saw some of that this morning, and then also the U.S. Department of Labor has got a long list of question and answers. But this is the poster, and then it's that's being put out by the U.S. Department of Labor. Your small businesses are going to have to post this. This is going to be another thing that goes on the wall of employee rights. And as you can see, it's going to last out to December 31st. So I think this is something that people need to be aware of. There are now going to be expanded benefits for your employees. And this is, and the other key thing here is this is in addition to what you're already providing them, what your employer is already providing them. So just another thing here for businesses in the state of Montana, keep in mind.
And I sometimes forget we don't all know everybody. That Senator Fitzpatrick, Steve Fitzpatrick from Great Falls. In real life, he's a lawyer, so when it gets legal and technical, we often have him work on it and talk about it. All right, Mr. Education, working on focused on education is Representative David Beatty.
Well, hello, everyone. I'll give you a brief update on the status of education in the state of Montana. Right now, normal state and local funding is flowing to the K-12 schools, and so they do not experience a funding difficulty right now. It took a bit to work through waivers on some federal requirements and also state requirements in the nutrition and in the transportation arenas, but those have been worked through. And indeed, transportation funding that is already available can be used, according to state law, in order to offset some of the costs of providing remote learning opportunities for students at home. For instance, providing paying for online or connection to the internet so that students that live in households that don't have that connection can be hooked up that way. There is also a component that was alluded to earlier of the federal stimulus plan that devotes funds to the schools, both higher education and the K-12 schools. It has three components. The first one I note there is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. It's available for the Governor's discretion to meet urgent needs created by the COVID-19 crisis. Right now, it looks like we're going to get something in the neighborhood of $8.8 million. Application process and guidance from the Department of Education is forthcoming and should be here by the end of April. There's also $41.3 million devoted to the K-12 system. This funding allocation as it stands now looks like it will go to schools based upon last year's Title I funding numbers. Applications are once again won't be available till the end of April. In higher education, you can see that there is a good deal of money around. A good deal of money coming in, around $29,000 or $29 million coming into the higher ed in total, being split between the university system, our community colleges, and the tribal colleges. The allocation between those entities is based upon student FTE and Pell Grant recipients. As it stands now, we are continuing to educate our students. As you know, as you probably know, the university system has gone to a largely all remote learning environment. There are some exceptions to that that are well controlled for absolutely necessary hands-on experiences. Within the K-12 system, the governor directed that during school closures after the first 2-week closure, that education must continue for students either via remote learning opportunities or by, if a district finds that it is unable to do that, by bringing the kids back to school after this crisis has passed. As of this last Sunday, all districts had submitted plans to the governor's office for providing remote services, remote learning services. And this is required within the governor's directive. As of yesterday, the governor had rejected none, but as I understand, many are still under review. Looking ahead, higher education has taken will take about an $18 million hit by the end of this semester, and that's driven largely because of the refund of room and board revenues that had been brought in to students who were no longer in the dorms, and also due to loss of event revenue. It turns out that within university funding, the concerts and conferences and that sort of thing that they host bring in a considerable amount of money. So once again, the net hit for the university system is about $18 million. My discussions with the Commissioner of Higher Education indicate that that's sustainable in the short term. In the long term, though, there is concern that perhaps next fall we'll see fewer non-resident students, not because of fatalities, but rather because of changes in student behavior. Perhaps they will be more likely to stay closer to home rather than go to other places, at least this next fall. These are the things being contemplated by the Commissioner of Higher Education. A lot needs to be done to understand that, but we are looking forward and trying to get ahead of that. Finally, the subcommittee I chair for the Legislative Finance Committee deals with education, and a big part of our work during the interim was on expanding career and technical education opportunities and trying to find ways to facilitate funding for that. Intention is to resume work within the next few weeks, certainly by the end of April or early May, on that interim work. I recognize that doesn't deal with the COVID-19 issue, but there are some more or less routine things that we must keep doing so that we're in a good position when the next legislative session comes to advance those ideas in career and technical education. And I do know that this is a high priority for the chamber, and worked with the chamber on that. All of us have, and look forward to continuing that work. So in the background, there will be some routine business being done. Lou, that's all.
Thank you, David. Let's see, a couple more here. So Representative Buttrey's on. He has a couple slides, some on retirement and some on the impact of the state, our state's particular economy. Ed, are you out there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I hear you. There you go.
Okay, I just wanted to speak quickly about some of the changes in HR 748 that dealt with retirement and pension plans. On the chart you've got in front of you, I've highlighted 4 main items. The first item deals with distributions from those plans like 401ks, profit sharing, the 403, which are the annuity-based plans, 457, which are the deferred compensation plans used by governments, and IRA plans. These changes in distribution allowing is permissive. It's not mandatory by the employer, which means the employer gets to decide whether they're going to implement these changes or not. What the changes do is allow individuals to obtain up to $100,000 in what they're calling coronavirus-related distributions. Individuals eligible for that are folks that have it or have spouse or dependents with the disease, or they can show, and this is self-certified through the employer, that they're experiencing financial consequences because of being laid off, reduction in hours, taking care of kids at home, etc. And this does include the business owners. These distributions are exempt from the 10% early withdrawal tax, and any taxes that are due on those monies that are distributed can be spread out over 3 years starting this year, whereas before they were immediately due upon receipt of the funds. And if they choose, they can repay those distributions over a 3-year period. They're just simply treated as rollovers. The second item deals with loans. If you want to take a loan from those retirement pension plans, again, this is permissive, not mandatory by the employer, but it does increase the maximum amount allowed to borrow from your plan by a qualified individual meeting those same requirements above, but increases that amount allowed from 50,000 to 100,000. Interestingly enough, also addressed in HR 748 is if you already have a loan from your retirement or pension plan, you can delay any repayments that are due this year for up to 1 year without penalty. You still accrue interest, but you don't have to make those repayments during this calendar year. Item number 3 deals with distribution from retirement accounts for retirees. Those folks that have hit the retirement age, there's a requirement currently that they have to take minimum distribution from those retirement accounts. And of course, if you do that at this point in time, you'd be selling stock at the bottom of the market. So there is a waiver in HR 748 that waives that minimum distribution requirement for year 2020, so you don't have to take those distributions. And the last item deals with pension plan funding, and this is for sponsors of single employer defined benefit plans. Normally, they have to make their minimum funding contributions 8.5 months from the end of the plan year. This delays that minimum funding contribution until January 1st, 2021. That's what I've got on that, Lou.
Okay. Now, next slide.
Okay, I thought this was interesting. This was actually put up by Wallet Hub. There's a lot of data that shows the economic exposure and risk because of the coronavirus pandemic. And so what I did was took the data from Montana and took the data from the surrounding states. And I created 3 charts. And this is really just kind of to give some stimulating thought or maybe some discussion. I think people, if they want the link to go on and look at the full report does show the methodologies they used and definitions in that. But the first chart you see there that says economies, this is really the economic risk rating. And so when you look at Montana, when the 5-state region, we're actually the worst when you look at the economic exposure to coronavirus because of the amount of high impact industries and people working in those industries. So we're 6th in the nation for risk, for economic risk, whereas you can see North Dakota's 13th, South Dakota's 40th, everybody else is kind of in between. The good news, if you look to the right in green, is we are the best of the 5 states for resources that we already have in place to help those businesses to cope, but we're still 36th in the nation. If you go to the second chart, that is looking at GDP as a percentage of the total GDP generated by the high-risk industries, and they've listed there some of what they consider the high-risk industries. Going across, you can see we're at worst risk because of the amount of GDP that we get from hotel and food service. We're 8th riskiest in the nation. Arts, entertainment, and recreation, we're also 8th. When you look at retail, mining, education, oil, gas, real estate, and others, we're kind of in the middle of the pack between the 5 states. But it does show you those high or those real risky rankings for hotel, food services, and recreation really contributes to why we're the 6th riskiest economy in the nation when you look at coronavirus. Lou, if you can go to the next sheet.
Yep, switch.
Okay. Next sheet is dealing with the share of employment from those highly impacted industries. There's a few more industries here. Any number that you see in red says we're the worst of the 5-state region. If you see it in green, we have the least risk in the 5-state region. And this is a pretty scary story. When you look at our share of employment, hotel food, we're 3rd worst in the U.S. Arts, recreation, and entertainment, we're 21st worst. I guess advertising, public relations, we must not have a lot of employees. We're 48th. We're close to being the best. Retail, we're in the middle. Transportation, we're the worst. Oil and gas extraction, and that we tie with North Dakota and Wyoming. And that really is when you look at the impact of coronavirus on oil and gas and the falling prices of oil, this adds a lot of risk. Educational services, we're near the top, and then what they've got defined in the report is other, we're worse in the 5-state region. This is just really to show, even though we haven't seen the huge impacts yet in the state of coronavirus, but as we go through our, I think Representative Garner is going to show a little bit of a tool that a lot of folks are using to show how we're going to spread out this pandemic and when we're going to kind of come out of it, hopefully. But this will show you the risks that we have and why this is a real deal for even a state like Montana. That's all I've got, Lou.
Thank you, Ed. All right, the bringer of joy, Mr. Frank Garner. Let me see if I can get this to work. Frankie, you're out there?
I am. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Frank, I just fired up your website. Your slide is up. Can you see it? We'll do what you tell me to do.
You bet. So I want to start by saying my name is Frank Garner. I'm the representative for House District 7 in Kalispell, and I'm a career police officer, retired police chief. And I've got a daughter who is a lab scientist at St. Pat's, and two sons who are policemen. So this has my full attention. And I just want to go over a couple of things now. That to start with, you've got some great experience on your board, and I'm not going to try to insert myself into that knowledge base, right? You've got healthcare folks who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, but here's some of the information that policymakers are looking at and in trying to determine severity and duration. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation site that we're looking at is one that's been referred to by the Trump administration during their briefings, and Dr. Bricks has referred to this site. It's a couple of things to remember about it. One, it's an estimate based on data and information they have. And as I've been watching it, the numbers have been changing. So based on information from the field, on a daily basis, this model can change. But here's a few things it tells us. First, and if Llew, you put the cursor over April 1st, right, we're at April 2nd, you can see when we anticipate resource use, we're really just at the beginning of it. And so I think it's important for us as policymakers to understand that, and those in the field who are anticipating resource use, we're just at the beginning of the curve. And if you go to May 1st, and this model predicts April 26th will be the peak resource day, particularly when it comes to ICU beds and total beds needed in hospitals. And we could extrapolate that'll also be true for, EMS, first responders in the field, that's about going to be our peak resource. So to begin with, when you hear some of these estimates, that are related to April 10th or even to the end of April, the president extending this recommendation across the country for shelter in place, you can see that at the end of April, we are just hitting the peak of resource use and this curve. And so I wouldn't anticipate, if in my planning, that we're going to be seeing dramatic changes around the end of April or May 1st. That's going to be where the maximum is used. If you go out now to June, you see the curve in this model predicts our resource use is going to be down about the same as it is today. That's two months from now. And so the important thing, I think, to look at, wrap our heads around, and manage expectations around is this is not going to be a 2-week or a 4-week issue. We're just going to be coming out of that curve, if this model is right, at the beginning of June. So this is going to be longer term when it comes to some of those policy decisions, particularly those related to the shelter in place issues. And again, you can see what some of the needs are that are being tracked, including ICU beds. Llew, if you go to the right and up a little bit and look at those numbers, it anticipates in Montana an ICU bed shortage of 43 beds. Again, I'd let the experts in the field talk about that more directly and what they expect. This also has some predictions of death totals. Llew, if you go down on the chart, it Right now, this model anticipates 266 COVID-19 deaths by August 4th. That's certainly less than some of the sources that even 30 days ago that I was talking to were predicting. And of course, it's going to be, all this is going to be greatly dependent on how successful we are on managing social distancing in the field. So just to start with, I think this is at least a model for us to look at when we're managing expectations, when we're looking at policy decisions. Of course, it'll be based on that and data and information from the experts, medical experts in the field for those people that are making these decisions, but just something that everyone can access and look at to kind of track what our numbers and experience could potentially look like.
Thanks again, Llew, and all of you. Like I said, you're really demonstrating some real leadership here, and we can't thank you enough for the time and the energy that you're pouring into it. I think we are keenly aware that you all have full-time lives outside the legislative body, and yet you're pouring your heart and soul into this thing during this crisis, and it's deeply appreciated by us. We will get through this, and it's not going to be fun in the process, but thank you for the leadership that you've shown, and we will continue to work with you and look for these sort of opportunities. I think this is a great educational opportunity that you provided for us, and we'll be sharing it with our broader membership. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Todd, and we'd like to make sure you know we appreciate the chance to visit with you and the folks on your board and your team about this, because it's important to us, and we recognize that making sure these businesses are going to be here and operational is going to be a cornerstone in our recovery. So we're committed to trying to make sure we do everything we can.
Yeah, absolutely. We
Thanks, Representative Garner.
appreciate you guys having our back, and we've tried to be aligned with the business world because we are the business world. So, all right. Well, thank you all, and I
Very
guess
good. Thanks, Llew.
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.